Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Erin, and for today's video we are going to be talking about the Villisca Axe Murder House. So today's video is going to kind of combine true crime and the paranormal. We're going to talk about an unsolved case that happened in Villisca, Iowa. And this took place between the evening of June 9th, 1912 and the early morning hours of June 10th, 1912. Sometime during those hours, 6 members of the Moore family as well as 2 of their guests were bludgeoned to death. Their murderer or murderers were never brought to justice, and this case remains unsolved to this day. So let's talk about the Moore family a little bit. The Moore family was a well-known and well-liked affluent family from Villisca, Iowa. The parents of the family were Josiah, who was 43, and Sarah, who was 39 at the time. They had 4 children: Herman, who was 11, Mary Catherine, who was 10, Arthur, who was 7, and Paul, who was 5. Josiah was a prominent businessman in the town, and their family was very active in their church. On June 9th, 1912, Mary Catherine had invited 2 friends to spend the night at the Moore house. Now, I might butcher one of these names because I'm not entirely sure how you say it, but the 2 girls that were invited to spend the night were Ina May and Lena Gertrude Stillinger. Now, Ina, or Ina, I'm not really too sure how you say it, it's spelled I-N-A, she was 8 years old, and Lena was 12. So the evening of June 9th, the Moores had a church function to attend. The Moores and their guests went to a Presbyterian church in town to attend a Children's Day event, which Sarah Moore had coordinated. That program went on probably until about 9:30 at night. After the program, the Moores and their guests walked back to the Moore house, and they would have returned back to the house between about 9:45 and 10 o'clock at night. What happened after they returned home that evening is still a mystery to this day. So early the next morning, one of the Moores' neighbors actually became concerned. Her name was Mary Peckham. Mary began to become concerned after she realized that no one from the Moore family had come out to do their morning chores or tend to the animals that they were keeping. So Mary went over and knocked on the door but received no answer. At that point, she actually tried to open the door, but it was locked. So not knowing what was going on, Mary kind of took it upon herself to let out the Moore's chickens and kind of do a little bit of their chores and tending to their animals. And then she called Josiah Moore's brother, Ross. Obviously, when Ross arrived, he too knocked at the door and again received no response. He also called out to the family, thinking maybe they didn't hear the knock and they would hear him yelling, and again, received no response from that either. So Ross also happened to have a key to the house, so he went ahead and used the key and let himself into the house, where he was met with absolute silence. The first place that Ross went was he opened up a guest room door that was downstairs on the first floor off of the parlor. When he opened up the door, he was met with the grisly scene of seeing the 2 bodies of the 2 little girls, Ina and Lena. He then called to Mary, who was still standing on the porch, and told her to call the peace officer of Villisca. And that peace officer's name was Henry Horton. He showed up shortly after he was called. And when he arrived, he went in to search the house. So obviously, he also found the Stillinger girls dead in the downstairs guest bedroom. However, upon further searching the house, he discovered the rest of the Moore family in their bedrooms, and they too had been bludgeoned to death. Now, during Horton's search, he found what he believed to be the murder weapon, which was an axe. He found the axe in the guest room with the Stillinger sisters. So after the discovery of the scene, some doctors came to examine the bodies, I guess the equivalent of a medical examiner, and they had deduced that the murders had taken place sometime between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m. During the investigation, 2 cigarette butts were found in an attic space upstairs. This led people to believe that the killer, or killers, had been hiding in that space quietly until the family got home, and then that's when this horrific crime took place. So it's thought that the murders began in the master bedroom with Josiah and Sarah. Something that was kind of interesting about this case is that Josiah was the only one that was murdered with the sharp end of the axe. He was hit in the face so many times with this axe that his eyes were missing. After killing Josiah and Sarah, the killer or killers then moved on to the Moore children in their bedroom and then onto the Stillinger girls down in the guest bedroom. So like I said, Josiah was the only one who was killed by the sharp end of the axe. The rest all appeared to have been bludgeoned to death with the dull end of the axe, and it all appeared that everyone had been sleeping when this occurred, and the only one who looked like they may not have been sleeping was Lena. They believed that Lena was the only one that was awake because when she was found, she was crossways in the bed rather than in a normal sleeping position. She also had a defensive wound, and it looked as if she also may have been sexually assaulted. So as for suspects in this case, several of them came up. One of them was actually tried twice, but their first trial ended in a hung jury, and the second trial ended in them being acquitted, and I'll get into that in just a little bit. So the first possible suspect we're going to talk about is Reverend George Kelly. Now, Kelly was a traveling minister who happened to be in Villisca the evening that this took place. He had taken part in that Children's Day event, so he would have been around the Moore family at that point in time. Now, Reverend Kelly was known to be kind of a strange guy. He was rumored to be known for peeping at women through the window and what have you, and he also was rumored to have asked women as well as young girls to pose nude for him. Now, apparently Reverend Kelly had left Villisca on the 10th between 5 and 5:30 a.m., so there is a chance that he could have been the murderer. Reverend Kelly is the one who was tried twice in this case. He was arrested in 1917 and charged with murder in this Villisca case. Now, Kelly had supposedly confessed to this crime, but this confession was never included in the trial because they considered it a mockery of the police work that had been done. So, as I said, during the first trial, it was a hung jury. When they performed the second trial, he was acquitted of the charges. Now, out of all these people that I'm listing, which I'll go through a couple more, Reverend Kelly seems like the most likely suspect to me, just because he was with the family at that children's event, and he could have followed them home. So next on the list of suspects is Frank Jones. So Jones was an Iowa state senator, and he also happened to have employed Josiah Moore at his implement store in Villisca. Josiah had left working for Jones in order to open up his own successful store. Obviously, he would have been angry because this would have taken away business and money from him, but it also took away a successful John Deere franchise. So Josiah took that franchise from Jones. Now, there was also a rumor saying that Josiah had been having an affair with one of Jones's daughter-in-laws, so that made him even more angry. So a detective had accused Jones and his son of hiring a man named William Mansfield to kill the Moore family. Now, this was something that Jones and his son had extensively denied, and they were never actually brought up on any charges in this case. So let's talk about William Blackie Mansfield. William Mansfield was arrested in 1916 for these murders. He was a prime suspect for detectives on the case, and like I said, they felt that he had been hired by the Jones family to kill the Moore family. Now, Mansfield was suspected of being a serial killer and was believed to have killed his wife, his infant child, and his in-laws in Illinois in 1914. These murders were done in a very similar fashion to what was done to the Moore family as well as the Stillinger girls. He also was supposedly responsible for 2 other murders that had occurred in Colorado to Jenny Peterson and Jenny Moore, and those also were axe murders that were done 4 days before this incident in Villisca had happened. Now, one thing that I had forgotten to mention about the crime scene was that all the mirrors in the house had been covered up, which was kind of bizarre. So a detective stated that he could prove that Mansfield was the killer in all 3 of these instances because in all 3, an axe had been used, the mirrors in the houses where these bodies were discovered were covered up, as well as a gas lamp was found at the foot of the bed, and it was turned down. In all three, there was also a wash basin that had been found in the kitchen where the murderer had obviously cleaned up. And in all three instances, the killer knew to cover up their fingerprints, which they believe Mansfield knew to do. And the reason he would have done that is because his fingerprints had been on file from a previous crime. So like I said, Mansfield was arrested in 1916 and he was brought to trial. However, he had provided an alibi via payroll, saying that during the time that these murders had taken place, that he was actually in Illinois. So Mansfield was released due to lack of evidence proving that he was there, and he actually later went on to sue and get money for being accused of doing this crime. I would say if Reverend Kelly wasn't the one who did this, that there could be a good chance that Mansfield did, just because of the similarities between the three different crimes that had occurred that had similarities to them. So I would say he would probably be the second choice for me as far as a suspect in this case. But the next suspect that we're going to talk about is Henry Lee Moore. Now, Henry Lee Moore was not related to the Moore family. Now, remember I had talked about Mansfield being accused of being a serial killer. Obviously, that was never proven. But there was some evidence that says that Henry Lee Moore may have actually been that serial killer. Now, Moore was actually convicted of killing his mother and his grandmother, and this was actually done in a very similar manner to what had happened to the Moore family. So he bludgeoned them to death with an axe. So the similarities between the murder case of Henry Lee Moore's mother and grandmother to the Moore family are what make him a potential suspect and not Mansfield, because like I said, Mansfield apparently had an alibi. However, Henry Lee Moore was never brought up on charges with the Villisca case. Now, the final suspect that I'm going to talk about is Andy Sawyer. Sawyer was a transient who was apparently in Villisca the night of the murders. Apparently, the morning that the bodies had been discovered, Sawyer approached a crew of workers that was working on a bridge in Villisca. And he had approached them because he was looking for employment. But what the employees had noticed was that his shoes were full of mud and his pants were wet up to his knees. So apparently this crew had taken Sawyer on and allowed him to do some work, and later that evening Sawyer was reading a newspaper which had the murders in it, and he seemed to be very interested in this particular story. Now, this struck the foreman as a little odd because he was transient and had really no ties to the area. So he thought it was a little weird that Sawyer was so enthralled with that particular case. And the other thing that he thought was odd was that Sawyer would sleep in his clothes and keep an axe nearby. So Andy Sawyer was actually turned into the sheriff on June 18th, 1912 by this particular foreman. Like I said, he had grown really suspicious of Sawyer. So aside from the other things I said, some other suspicions that made him think that maybe Sawyer was involved was that Sawyer had told him that he was in Villisca the night of the murders. And he also had a sudden outburst on the job site where he exclaimed that he was going to cut everybody's heads off. Apparently the foreman's son also said that Sawyer had pointed out how the murderer would have escaped when driving through Villisca one day. However, Sawyer ended up being released because he too had an alibi. He was in a different part of Iowa that night, and he had been arrested and thrown in jail for the night for vagrancy. Now, aside from this list of people, there were several other suspects and confessions made. However, nobody was ever formally charged with the crime. So, as I said, this house kind of ties in a true crime story as well as paranormal. So the Villisca Axe Murder House is actually open to paranormal investigation. I believe you can rent it on a nightly basis and they will allow you to go in and do paranormal investigations. Obviously, with a house that has had such a tragic past, there probably is some kind of paranormal activity going on. You have to remember that a lot of times just the energy from a crime can be dispersed wherever it had occurred. So there are many videos on YouTube about different paranormal investigations in the Villisca axe house, and a lot of them do get good evidence, EVPs, things moving, stuff like that. So definitely would recommend searching for it and checking some of those videos out. I one day would love to go up to Villisca to do my own paranormal investigation in the house. I don't know when or if that will ever happen, but it definitely would be something pretty cool to do. I can see, like I said, with such a tragedy that had happened, why that house would be haunted. I also find it interesting that this is something that was never actually solved. So what do you guys think of this crime? Do you think that somebody was up in that attic space waiting for this family to come back to carry out this horrific crime? Do you think that Reverend Kelly followed them back to the house and he was the one who did this? Honestly, out of all the suspects, like I said, I believe that just from what I read about Reverend Kelly, that he is probably my #1 top suspect, just because he had been doing some weird things anyway. He was around the family that evening, and maybe he followed them home. I guess my other thought would be that Williams Mansfield or Henry Lee Moore would be the suspect, and maybe they did, not together, but maybe they did in fact wait in that attic space for the family to get home. Maybe they were hired, or one of them was hired to kill the Moore and his family. It's unfortunate that the Stillinger sisters kind of became just a part of that since they were there. Can't imagine what their parents and family even felt, you know, having found that both of their daughters had been bludgeoned to death. But that's it for this video, guys. If you liked it, please give me a big old thumbs up. If you want to see more videos like this one, make sure you hit the subscribe button down below, and I will catch you guys in my next video. Bye!